Hello, welcome to Comparative again. So today we're just going to dissect or just identify the structures contained within the abdominal or peritoneal cavity. And once you've made the necessary incisions, you can reflect the body wall like that. There are a bunch of organs, the entrails, mostly from the digestive system of the cat, but not all are part of the digestive system. I'll make a separate video for the urogenital system, but today we're going to focus on the digestive organs. So you remember that the digestive tract, of course, originates from the mouth, then from the mouth to the oral cavity, and then to the pharynx, somewhere here. So watch that video first before you proceed here. And then from the pharynx, the digestive tract continues as the esophagus, entering the pleural cavity. Let me show you again. The esophagus there at the dorsal thoracic cavity. The esophagus, and then the esophagus will penetrate the diaphragm and then tatagos siya dito sa peritoneal cavity. Okay. This is an obvious structure. Identify it now if you want, but let's focus first on the main alimentary canal. So this is the diaphragm, just the posterior side of it, and then you'll see that emerging from it is the esophagus. And then the esophagus will continue here. It will be continuous with this sac-like digestive organ, the stomach. Okay? And then the stomach will continue as the small intestine. In mammals, the intestines are divided into a small intestine and then the large intestine. The size difference is obvious. Large intestine, specifically the colon part of the large intestine. The second portion of the large intestine is what's called as the rectum, which is down there in the pelvic cavity. So we'll see the rectum once we dissect the urogenital system. But that's the main alimentary canal. And from the alimentary canal are branches out mga accessory digestive organs, mainly the liver and the pancreas. That's the pancreas next to the small intestine. Let's examine them more closely. Okay. So the esophagus becomes the stomach. Okay. In this case, our cat, the stomach is distended. Obviously, it had a huge meal before it died, sadly. So it's distended. Hindi na masyadong kita or obvious yung mga portions ng stomach. But there are parts, and different parts yung stomach. Right? The one nearest the point of entry ng esophagus is called the cardia, or the cardiac end of the stomach. So that region contains a sphincter called the cardiac sphincter or cardiac valve, which regulates the entry of food from the esophagus to the stomach. And then just adjacent or beside the cardiac end of the stomach is the fundus. Okay, the fundus next to the cardiac end. And then the largest portion of the stomach is called the body. And the one close to the intestine, it tapers out into a pyloric end, pyloric portion of the stomach. And just like the cardiac end of the stomach, it contains a sphincter or valve called the pyloric valve. which regulates the passage of pre-digested food into the small intestine. So the stomach, its morphology is typically J-shaped or U-shaped. May curvature siya. And therefore there will be a convex border and a concave border. The convex border is called the greater curvature, and then the concave border is the lesser curvature. Okay, and the main function of the stomach is for digestion, of course, but specifically for protein digestion. So this is the site where the food will be stored and mixed with gastric acid and also an enzyme called pepsin, which will initially digest the proteins contained in the food, and it will essentially transform the food into an acidic mush called chyme before that chyme enters the small intestine for further digestion and finally nutrient absorption. If you make an incision, which you should do, make an incision to see the mucosal wall of the stomach, you'll see that it will contain longitudinal folds called rugae, which serves to or allows the stomach to expand. And then after the stomach, the chyme will enter the small intestine. Okay, and there are 3 sections of the small intestine. The most proximal one, closest to the pyloric end of the stomach, or immediately after the pyloric portion of the stomach, is the duodenum. So that's the duodenum. And then most of the middle portion of the small intestine, the one you see here, are part of the jejunum. And the more distal portion of the small intestine next to the colon, so this is the colon already, the large intestine, and you see its boundary or junction with the small intestine. So that distal segment of the small intestine is the ileum. So that's the ileum, the distal portion of the small intestine. Right, so let's look at the duodenum. So the duodenum is a very important region for the small intestine, because this is the site where the digestive enzymes coming from the pancreas, will be emptied, and also some bile coming from the gallbladder and the liver will also be emptied into the duodenum. And so those bile acids will emulsify the chyme, helping in digestion of fats, of lipids, so that they can be absorbed, whereas the digestive enzymes coming from the pancreas will further digest the carbohydrates and proteins. Right? And they all empty, those secretions will empty into the duodenum. So let's examine more closely those accessory digestive organs that I just mentioned. So the liver, it has a lot of functions. You can read more about them, but one is, as I said, is the production of bile, which will help in digestion of lipids. Right? And so the liver will produce that bile, but it will temporarily store it into another organ called the gallbladder. So that greenish sac there, in this case it's already collapsed, is the gallbladder. That's the gallbladder. So it will where bile is temporarily stored until needed when the chyme has already reached the duodenum. And so the liver is divided into several lobes. So just like the lungs, it's divided into left and right lobes. And then each one of those lobes will be further subdivided into medial and lateral lobes. So for example, let's take the left lobe of the liver. Here's the median lobe, or median left lobe of the liver. And the larger one is the lateral left lobe of the liver, or left lateral lobe. Choose whatever syntax you prefer. And then the right lobe will also be divided into median and lateral lobes. So this one, in this case, it's the reverse. The larger one is the median right lobe of the liver, and the smaller is the lateral right lobe of the liver, which is actually covered by the median lobe. So here's the lateral right lobe of the liver. And then there's an even tinier lobe called the caudate lobe. And in order to see it, you have to look dorsal to the liver. Oops, sorry about that alarm. So here's the caudate lobe of the liver. Okay. And then, as I was saying about bile is produced from the liver, and it will be drained by, okay, so this is a delicate dissection. So bile produced from the liver will be drained by hepatic ducts. Okay, let me just, those fine branches with dark contents, those are actually hepatic ducts. They will be collected into this much larger hepatic duct. Sorry, my hand. Okay. Okay, finer hepatic ducts, and then will be drained into this. This is difficult. This is a hepatic duct. There. That's one hepatic duct. And then it will converge with a duct specifically draining the gallbladder. So this greenish organ here is the gallbladder. Just trace it distally, and you'll see it has its own duct called the cystic duct. And what I just want to tell you is that those hepatic ducts draining the liver of bile will converge with the cystic duct of the gallbladder and create the common bile duct. See? That convergence will create the common bile duct, which will carry the bile into the duodenum. There. Common bile, cystic duct, and then hepatic ducts. And then once the bile is already, here's another hepatic duct draining the right lateral lobe ng liver. So that's another hepatic duct converging into the common bile duct. And here's the pancreas. And I've dissected it enough to reveal you one of its ducts here. That's the pancreatic duct containing the pancreatic enzymes, secretions, So the common bile duct intersects with the pancreatic duct just before they enter the duodenum. And where they enter into the duodenum, there's a slight bulge. So that bulge in the duodenal wall, where the common bile duct and pancreatic ducts enter, is called the ampulla of Vater. Ampulla of Vater. That's the site where they empty their secretions into the duodenum. Okay, that's it for the duodenum. So now the foodstuffs pre-digested by the stomach will be further digested by the pancreatic enzymes and bile acids. And then it will go down to the jejunum, as I said. And then finally into the ileum, the distalmost segment of the small intestine, before it enters the colon, the large intestine. Right? And the final dissection in the intestine that you need to do is to just make an incision to see the mucosal wall of the intestine. Let me see where I made that incision. Here's one. So if you make a longitudinal incision on one of the segments ng intestine, you'll see that its internal wall, the mucosa, is not smooth. It has a velvety appearance, kind of like velvet, and that's because of the numerous villi, which are infoldings of the mucosal wall of the intestine. And those villi will essentially increase the surface area for nutrient absorption, because the intestine is specialized for that function. Okay? And then now we reach the large intestine. By this time, most of the nutrients will have already been absorbed by the small intestine and carried into the blood circulation. And now the digestive stuff will arrive at the large intestine, for final reclamation of water. That's the main function of the colon, for reabsorption of water, because digestion is quite dehydrating. There's lots of secretions, you're losing a lot of fluids. The colon will reabsorb those water and also salts para hindi ka ma-dehydrate. So that's the large intestine, or colon portion of the large intestine, and it has segments just like the small intestine. So immediately after the ileum, there's a blind pouch here of the colon. That's the cecum. The cat is not a good example or specimen for showing the cecum because it's a carnivore. The main function of the cecum is for hindgut fermentation. So typically the cecum houses a lot of symbiotic, mutualistic microbes, bacteria, that will aid in digestion of plant matter, for example, mga cellulose. Because animals in general do not secrete cellulase or enzymes that can break down the fibrous material of plants. But the bacteria contained inside the cecum will help us extract some of the nutrients present in those fibrous material, aiding in further adding to the nutritional value of the food. But as you know, the cat is not a vegetarian, it's a carnivore, or they're carnivore. So medyo maliit lang yung kanyang cecum, but that's a blind pouch there. That's the cecum of the cat. Right, and then the large intestine or colon portion of it is divided into an ascending, this is ascending, transverse, and then descending colon. And then inside will continue inside the pelvic cavity as the rectum. So we'll check it out when we go to the urogenital system. But ascending, transverse, and then descending colon. And then at the junction between the ileum and the ascending colon, you have to dissect the ascending colon somewhere here to be able to see. Oops, there are lots of fecal matter. You have to clean it, wash it, to be able to see that puckered structure there. Puckered structure there is called the ileocolic valve. Another sphincter. There are lots of sphincters regulating or controlling the flow of digesta into the alimentary canal. Para hindi tuloy-tuloy yung pag-flow, they have to stop first, for example, in the small intestine for complete digestion and absorption before they enter the large intestine. So, yun yung parang generic function ng mga valves. So that control yung flow ng substance. Hindi lang tuloy-tuloy. You have to stop first and then for complete digestion and then move on to the next segment. So this, the ileocolic valve regulates the passage of digested food from the small intestine into the large intestine. And that's basically the digestive system contained inside the abdominal cavity. But that's not everything actually. There's this structure here just beside the stomach. It's always partnered with the stomach. Right? But it's not technically part of the digestive system, so I saved it for last. This dark organ here beside the stomach is called the spleen. So it's a lymphoid organ, another lymphoid organ, a source of blood cells. And one of its function, aside from being a source of infection-fighting white blood cells, is for breakdown of old red blood cells. So yung mga luma na red blood cells, they have to be recycled and broken down, and that's where the spleen comes in. Right, and there are a bunch of fatty connective tissues na yan that I'll talk about in a separate video. Those are mesenteries that suspend the visceral organs inside the cavity so that they won't be disarranged. Yung stomach mapupunta dito, liver napunta dito. So that doesn't happen because of the mesenteries, helping suspend the visceral organs inside the cavity, keeping their positions while allowing for some degree of movement, so they can jostle around like that. And that's it for the digestive system of the cat. See you in the next video for the mesenteries or the urogenital system, whichever you watch first.